Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2022 Senate elections. This is going to be the third to last 2022 Senate prediction. I know that sounds crazy because we've been doing these for 2 years now, but we're almost here. It's October 8th today, and we're going to do one on the 22nd or the 23rd, 2 weeks from now. We're going to do a final update on Election Day. That'll be the final video I think will go on this channel before Election Day, and we're almost here, and we've got a lot of information at our fingertips right now, and it's just going to be so interesting to see what happens between now and Election Day. And we still have a month to go. We still do have some time, but like in the grand scheme of things, we are very much in the midst of election season right now. And when you look at the way that everything is happening, it's happening so quickly. Just half an hour before I'm beginning, or not half an hour, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before beginning to film this video, yet another Herschel Walker scandal dropped. We'll talk about that when we get to Georgia, but everything's moving so quickly right now, and it's just all very interesting. So let's take a look at our state Democratic states. These are the states of Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. Again, these are states that I expect to go Democratic by over 15%. State of Republican states, these are Idaho, Utah, the Dakotas, Kansas, both Oklahoma races. There's been some really weird polls there, but not really worth talking about both of those Oklahoma races, especially when you remember that it's still a state that Trump won by 40%. Even a massive performance on the part of Kendra Horn and Madison Horn would not be enough to get it anywhere close to a likely margin. And while Oklahoma's had some closer governor races in the past, this is a nationalized race. Senate races are much more polarized than gubernatorial races. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Indiana, Alabama, South Carolina. Again, those are 44 safe GOP states. I think most of these should be, pretty about what you'd expect. Utah, there's been some talk of moving it to likely. I know some people have it as likely Republican because Evan McMillan's running as independent, but Utah is very red down ballot, and I think a lot of people forget that because it's, they're like, oh, well, Trump only won Utah by 19%, but the thing is, in 2020, Lee outran Trump by a ton. So McMillan's a good candidate, but he's not going to be able to really do enough to get this race to anything under 15% margin of victory for the GOP. So likely Democratic states, there are only two here going to stay the same as they were last time: Colorado and New Hampshire. Again, these states I think could have been a bit more competitive in other circumstances. I think the Dobbs decision really killed GOP chances in Colorado, even though they did end up nominating a good candidate. Joe Day. Joe Day's a solid recruit for the GOP. I think he'll do fairly well compared to Trump and Heidi Gaynell in the Denver suburbs. But at the end of the day, Colorado's a rapidly left-running state, and the abortion issue really hurts Republicans here. New Hampshire, when you look at the polls, I have my own polling average, as I have talked about in the past, which tosses out all the really bad polls, and it kind of averages out these other polls based on how much they missed in 2020. It is the Democrats up by 5.5. I think that's a fairly reasonable expectation. Again, there is a path here for it to be closer, but at the end of the day, Hassan's a good candidate. She won in 2014. It was a governor's race, but she did win a red wave in 2014, so she knows how to do this, and I think she'll do fairly well once again. Now, for our likely Republican states, I am seeing a couple here. First off, there's Iowa. Iowa's not really too interesting. It's Chuck Grassley's going to win re-election no matter what. The question is whether is it by 15 or by 12. I think it's going to be closer to 12. I think he'll outrun Trump, but he's not going to do as well as he's done in the past just because polarization is going to start to catch up to him. Ohio's another one. Look, with every video, I get a little less confident about J.D. Vance winning in Ohio. And that's not to say that I think Tim Ryan's going to win or that he really has any good chance of winning. But if you look at the polls, they have just been really close. And even in this adjusted polling average, which applies all the 2020 miss and, even and then some, and takes out all the terrible polls, like Center Street PAC and all these PACs that are just biased towards Tim Ryan, even then, J.D. Vance is only up by 2.6%. Now, I think he'll win by around double that, maybe even up to 6%. But at the end of the day, Tim Ryan's running a brilliant campaign. He's, put out some really good campaign ads. He's trying very clearly to appeal to the other side. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be, a very impressive showing for a Democrat in this environment in a state like Ohio, even though he probably will not win. Florida is the final likely Republican state. Again, Marco Rubio is going to be fine. He'll probably win by something like 10 or 11%. Val Demmings is a good Democratic candidate, but she doesn't have the firepower to take on Rubio, especially, because Rubio has a ton of money and is very popular in Florida. I fully expect Marco Rubio to carry Miami-Dade County. I don't think it'll be particularly close. Next up is our lean Democratic states. And by the way, these states that I've like left unhighlighted are like the truly competitive states, like the states that are like actually in play. Ohio's on the border of that, but like these states, these final 6 states, the states that I think are actually like truly, each party has like a greater than 25-30% chance of winning them. So we'll start off with the state of Arizona. Arizona, to me at this point, is looking not too hot for the GOP. Blake Masters had a decent debate performance from what I've heard. Again, I didn't take the time to watch it, but he had a solid debate performance. Credit to him. But at the end of the day, most people don't watch debates, and if you remember, like there were a lot of senators in 2020 who did not do well in their debates, like Tom Tillis and Joni Ernst especially did not really do well in their debates, and they ended up winning re-election, doing a lot better than most people expected. So it's not great for Kelly that he didn't do particularly well in that debate, but it also doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And Blake Masters has just not been able to run a good campaign. Republicans aren't funding him as much as they would like to, and especially when you look at what they're doing in Nevada specifically, but also Pennsylvania, it's clear that they view those 2 seats as their best chances to hold on to the Senate, and that's kind of what they're hammering home. So I am gonna, I guess, go with lean D. The 538 polls of Kelly up by 6. My average has him up by about 5. But again, this is a GOP friendly average. I could, I don't think Kelly being up by 6 and 538 is too unreasonable. But either way, the only path for Masters at this point is to do a lot better in the suburbs than anyone expects, and to do better with Hispanic voters, and hope Hispanic voters just don't turn out as much, which I think could happen. But the Dobbs decision really killed any of that floor the Democrats had in the past. So at this point, Mark Kelly is a ton of money, popular incumbent, has led in literally every single poll. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to win re-election by around 3%. Now, next up, lean Democratic state. That is the state of Georgia. Georgia is at this point, to me, looking very bad for Herschel Walker. And this is the most confident I've ever been that Raphael Warnock's going to win. A new scandal seems to come out every day for, a Republican candidate here, Herschel Walker. Back in June, we learned that he fathered children with other women. We learned that he had domestic abuse allegations, that he allegedly held up a gun to his wife's head and said, "I'm going to blow your profanity brains out." We now know that he, I'm getting my Herschel Walker scandals mixed up. That's never a good sign. But we now know that he paid for an abortion for another woman. One that he had out of wedlock, and that he, was a distant, was an absent father figure in his son's childhood. And there have been some really, quite frankly, it's just really sad because you look at these text messages where his son was texting him, "Dad, what's my favorite color? What grade am I in?" And Herschel Walker would just reply, "I love you," which is heartbreaking stuff. Obviously, I feel terrible for Herschel Walker's children and whatnot, but on the that is my job to cover. My job is to cover the election side, and that's a really bad look for Herschel Walker between his domestic abuse allegations, the fact that a lot of people are questioning whether he's mentally fit to be a senator, and also the fact that he did pay for an abortion despite the fact that he said he's pro-life without any exceptions, and just not looking good for Herschel Walker at this point. I think he has a chance, but that would rely on Democratic turnout being depressed, and it would rely, again, like Arizona, an improvement in the suburbs. But again, Herschel Walker's just a really controversial figure. Brian Kemp will do well in the suburbs, but Georgians like to ticket split. We saw it in the suburbs in 2016 where, Johnny Isaacson, the incumbent Republican senator, won by 15% statewide. He carried Gwinnett County, carried Henry County. He did very well in Cobb County and whatnot. And then all those counties voted for Hillary Clinton. So there's a lot of ticket splitting in that area specifically. I think we're going to see that again, where Kemp will do very well in the suburbs, but, we'll see a Warnock victory coincide with that. I think there's like a 50. I think, to me, it's pretty clear that like a runoff would be is still the more likely scenario. I think that if I had to guess, it goes to a runoff, but I could also see Warnock winning outright. But at this point, it's just really not looking good for Herschel Walker. I think he has 25-30% chance of winning after all these scandals, and they just keep coming. So I think on election day, we're going to see the vote be within. I think Warnock will lead by maybe like 1 or 2% on election day. It will just barely fall short of 50, but by the runoff, I think the runoff's going to be a 3 to 4 point victory for Raphael Warnock. So that's in the lean Democratic column, but I'm getting more and more confident about Raphael Warnock's chances here. Now, lean Republican states, they also have 2. These are the states of Wisconsin and North Carolina. So Wisconsin has just been like really bad for Democrats for the past 3-4 weeks. Mandela Barnes had a lot of momentum at the beginning. If you look at these earlier polls over here, they all showed him leading, but since then it's just gotten really bad for him. And if you take a look at my average, he is down by 1 point, or he's up by 1.1% right now. And so Ron Johnson's probably going to win. I would have a harder like the path for Mandela Barnes in this state, in this election, would be to raise turnout in the city of Milwaukee, to do better, and not to do better, but to have Madison make up a higher share of the electorate. Not Madison, Dane County, which is home to Madison, very blue county, make up a higher share of the electorate than it did in 2020, which is possible. But again, it's just kind of a list of boxes to check. So that would be Milwaukee turnout, Madison turnout, doing damage control in the rural areas. Again, the rural areas in Wisconsin are much more Democratic down ballot. So like Cammie Baldwin and even Russ Feingold in 2016, despite losing by 3.5% statewide, both of those people, and Tony Evers as well, did better than Joe Biden in the rural areas because there are a lot of, Democrats for Trump type voters there who will vote for Democrats, like for Senate, governor, state legislature, but will vote for Trump or, the Republican nominee federally. So again, not saying Barnes will be able to do that, but he'd have to stop the bleeding there. And he'd also finally have to do better than Feingold in the Wow counties, which I think he'll do better than Feingold in Waukesha specifically. I've written about Wisconsin. I encourage you to go check it out. It's uepyt.substack.com. But things are just not looking good for Barnes right now because Johnson is really well liked in the Wow counties. He does very well there consistently, and I don't think Barnes has enough appeal to those areas to get cut into Barnes or to Johnson's margins in a meaningful way. So unless Milwaukee turnout's really good, I don't see a path, or I don't see any argument for Barnes being favored. I think he's going to lose by about 4% as it stands today. He had a decent debate showing from what I've heard. Again, I didn't watch that one either because I quite frankly don't have the time to watch 90-minute Senate debates, but most people don't pay attention to debates, even though you see people like Beto O'Rourke, Mandela Barnes, Blake Masters doing well in their Senate debate, and their debates respectively. Don't really think it matters as much. So Mandela Barnes, end of the day, I still think is going to go down by about 4%. Now North Carolina, this is a really interesting one, and I think that this is if you made me give you a sleeper race, like a race that I think is going to go one way, but could totally see being an underrated chance to go the other way, it would be North Carolina, without a question of a doubt for me. When you take a look at the polls, they have been very close consistently. Right now, my poll, the 538 average has Ted Budd up by 0.7. My average has him up by 2.6, which again, fairly solid margin. But again, this is a more GOP-friendly metric because it does adjust for all the polling errors that have happened in North Carolina over the years. And ultimately, it's really a question of black turnout. That's what really matters here. We can talk about the rural areas, and they do matter. Suburbs do matter, but this is my guide to North Carolina. This is what I think matters in North Carolina. If on the weekend before the election, the black share of the electorate is up to 19 or 20%, Shari Beasley has a 50% chance of winning, maybe even more. If the early vote data is just not promising for Democrats and there's no evidence of black turnout going up, I will move this race to likely Republican on election day. I will have Ted Budd favored by 5%. So I don't think so. Lean R is a very transient rating. I'll probably have it as Lean R in my next prediction unless a big scandal drops either way. But my next prediction will be on October 22nd, 23rd, 24th, somewhere in that ballpark. I'll probably have it as Lean R. But my prediction on election day, I stand by this. Will either be one of the toss-up ratings, which would be tilt, or likely R. No, Lean R will be out the window for the state on election day because when you take a look at what Shari Beasley, her candidacy is based on getting black turnout up compared to where it's been in past midterms. Because in past midterms, Democrats have run decent candidates like Kay Hagan and Elaine Marshall. They've still gotten smoked in North Carolina just because of black turnout being so bad. So if Shari Beasley can, maintain that momentum in North Carolina for the Democrats, she has a 50% chance of winning, maybe even more. If not, which seems to be the more likely outcome at this point, Ted Budd will win on election day. So I want to see the black turnout early vote numbers. Again, the other path for Beasley would be hoping that rural turnout falls like it did in the Georgia runoffs. Because again, I think Ted Budd is a better candidate for the suburbs than people think, but a worse candidate for the rural areas than people think. So I think he's going to do decently well in the suburbs. But he's going to do a lot worse in the rural areas than people expect. Because people think that he's the best of both worlds. He's like a Glenn Young candidate that he can do well in the suburbs, but also do very well in the rural areas, right? That's the ideal Republican, essentially. It's what Glenn Youngkin and Jack Ciattarelli did, right? But the thing is, in a midterm, after Dobbs, it's harder to do, and also in a national race, it's harder to do because governor's race, you can be talk a lot more about local issues like education and taxes, whereas Senate races are more about bigger nationwide issues. And also, Shari Beasley historically has done very well with white voters for a Democrat. She hasn't won them obviously, but in 2020, she outran Biden by high single digits in most of the rural counties that are smaller, whiter, in the western part of the state. So she's a good candidate for the area in general. And also Ted Budd, I just don't think is that great of a candidate in that, and for the area, not super. He's not a big energizer. He's kind of like a David Perdue in that his appeal is supposed to be in the suburbs, but it does come at a cost of not getting great rural numbers. So Again, none of this is me saying that Ted Budd's going to win or he's going to lose, but I do think that there are paths for Sherry Beasley here. But again, it's all about the early vote. I want to see what the early vote says. I want to see what Sherry Beasley can do with black voters early on. So that will be Lenar. Probably going to move that by election day, though. So these are the two final Senate races, and I think I believe the Democrats are going to win the Senate this year. And I say that because when you look at the way this is composed, I'm pretty confident about these 49 seats. I think Republicans are pretty clearly favored in 49. I think Democrats are pretty clearly favored in the other 49. But what about these two states? The issue the Republicans have fundamentally is that they have to win both these states to win the Senate. So it's possible. I could totally see both these states going red. The thing is, Democrats only need to win one. And I think that's going to happen. I think they're going to win Pennsylvania, but I think they're going to lose Nevada. And let's just talk about this for a second. So let's start with the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is narrowing, and there's no denying this. So right now on FiveThirtyEight, John Fetterman's up by 6.6%, which, by the way, is 0.3% less than Joe Biden at this point. So on October 8th, 2020, Biden led Pennsylvania by 6.9%. Fetterman leads it by 6.6%. So if the polls change the same way that between now and election day they did in 2020, and if the polls miss by the same amount, he'd win by 0.9%. So again, very much within that margin of error. Now, the caveat to that is the polls in Pennsylvania have been very good during midterms, just not in presidential years recently. And so there'll be less of a polling error, which is what I'm expecting. So my big thing here is that once you adjust for the polls, Oz is still down by 5.3, and he still hasn't led in a single poll, not even Trafalgar, not even Susquehanna, not even Insider Advantage, all of which had Trump winning Pennsylvania in 2020. And so to me at this point in time, Oz is closing the gap. He has a much better chance than he did even a month ago. But Fetterman's still a favorite. Fetterman is still likely to. Fetterman is still clearly the favorite here. He's still likely to do fairly well. I think he's going to do better than Biden in most of the rural working class counties because, again, down ballot lag and also the fact that Oz just isn't a good candidate for those areas compared to Trump. I think Fetterman's going to do fairly well. He'll win Erie County. I think he'll win. He'll do better in Allegheny. He'll do better in Lackawanna, which is Scranton. I do think we're going to see a bit of a reversion towards Dr. Oz in the Philadelphia suburbs, and I think the best way to visualize this would be imagine the 2016 and the 2016 presidential and Senate races in Pennsylvania. I think Fetterman's going to get kind of obviously a little worse, but kind of the McGinty coalition of doing a lot better relative in the working class and rural areas than in the suburbs, while getting Clinton numbers in the suburbs. Because again, the way for the Democrats to win Pennsylvania in 2016 would have been, for McGinty to win, she would have held on to her working class / rural margins and gotten Hillary Clinton's suburban margins. And Hillary would have had it done the vice versa, hold on to her suburban margins, but do as well as McGinty did with working class and rural voters. And so I think that's what we're going to see with Fetterman. And that nets out to about a 1.5, 2-point victory. That's what I'm expecting right now. Again, if the polls narrow a few more points, I'll move it probably to tilt R. But at the end of the day, Fetterman has still led in every single poll, and I just don't see the merit aside from gut feelings and vibes to say Dr. Oz is going to win. So Pennsylvania is still tilt D, although the gap is closing in a fairly meaningful way. Now Nevada, this is kind of a hard call for me to make because I've always been a big blue Nevada guy. I've always been someone who's believed in blue Nevada because in 2020, and again, I'm being arrogant here, but in 2020, I felt I had a decent feel for the state because it was it felt very marginal to me. I knew Biden was going to not do as well as Hillary in Las Vegas. I knew the suburbs wouldn't trend as left, but I knew he'd do better in Washoe County. And that's what happened. I had him winning up by, I think, 3%. He went up by 2.5%. So I was pretty good in Nevada in 2020. And I was pretty confident CCM was going to win until the polls just bolted towards Laxalt. And I'll show you on a graph here. Cortez Masto held a lead dating back to, end of May, and she never really relinquished it. It got close at some points, but even a month ago, she had a 4-point lead. It's now Laxalt's up by 1.4%. And so when you look at the fact that, Laxalt's led in 6 of the past 7 polls, or actually, 6 of the past 7 polls, not good for Cortez Masto. When you look at the fact that Laxalt is getting a ton of money from Republicans because they, I think it's unambiguously at this point the GOP's best pickup opportunity. Very good for him. And he's, again, he still has a cash disadvantage. He still has a bit of a, enthusiasm gap between him and Cortez Masto. But Nevada is a state that voted 2% to the right of the country. Laxalt's not a bad candidate the way that Masters, Oz, Vance, or Walker are. And Cortez Masto is a fine incumbent. I think that she's doing fairly well right now for her status. But she's not as good as Mark Kelly. She's not as good as, a Raphael Warnock or a Maggie Hassan. So again, Nevada, I think is really a toss at this point, and I want to see the early vote numbers because Nevada, North Carolina, the states where early vote matters the most right now. But if the election were to be held today, I think Laxalt would win by a couple thousand votes. It would be unbelievably close, and it's like a coin flip race. But at this point, I think Laxalt surge in the polls is just too much for me to ignore. So that's my Senate prediction for as of right now. Again, this is my I have one on October 22nd, 23rd, and I will have one on Election Day, but this is my third to final Senate prediction. It's kind of sad because we've been doing this for so long, but it's also pretty cool that we've made it this far. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, guys.